Today we will be talking about the Ramsey growth model, also sometimes called the neoclassical growth model. If we compare to what we were doing last time, so we were talking about the solo growth model. The solo growth model, in some ways, it's not really a typical economics model. And the reason why is that the savings rate is exogenous. So there's no real decision being made by households. The government tells them how much to save, and then the model is basically just a production function and exogenous household savings. So from that point of view, it's almost a statistical model, and then we just sort of assign names to the various parts of the model. This is a household, this is production, this is a firm, but there's no real decisions being made. Of course, that's not very realistic because in the real world, the government doesn't decide what households consume. Households make that decision for themselves. So as you can see on this slide, I've written that in the real world, when consumers are trying to decide what they are going to consume, they're looking at a price, an interest rate for saving, and they're thinking, and also they're looking at their own holdings of wealth, and they're deciding how much they would like to consume today versus tomorrow versus 2 periods from now. Moreover, if we think about firms, they also react to changes in factor prices. If it becomes more expensive to, say, rent capital or to hire labor, then firms are going to reduce the relative amount of either capital or labor, depending on which one is becoming more expensive. All right. So, if we're thinking about what policy advice we would like to give governments, we don't want to take the savings rate as exogenous, since we don't believe that governments can or should force households to save. Although you could dig in there a little bit and think about ideas like nudges to get people to save more, and things like that. But anyway, yeah, we can't force people to save, but the central bank does change the interest rate, right? So if the central bank is changing the interest rate, then in a sense, then it can influence how much people save. All right, somewhere on here, I think there's a choice that I can make. So you can see my cursor a little bit better, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So in a sense, I don't want to spoil the surprise, but a spoiler is that the conclusions of the Ramsey growth model are not going to be very much different than the conclusions of the solo growth model. So we're still going to get capital as being unable to be an engine for growth in the long run. And in the long run, growth is going to be determined by the growth rate of technological change, or if you like, the growth rate of productivity. So in that sense, we actually get a very similar conclusion to the solo model. Still, I think this is an important model to present. And the reason why is that this is a more typical economics model. So by understanding this model, you're going to understand the tools that you need to solve standard economics models at, say, the master's level. So as I write here, this is a dynamic model. We have decisions being made by several different types of agents in this model. It's going to be general equilibrium because the prices are going to be endogenous. Depending on what people choose, that's going to affect the levels of capital and labor in the economy. Well, at least the levels of capital in the economy. And the level of capital is then going to translate into an interest rate, which is a price. So we're going to solve for that interest rate. Okay. So, what people use these days often, people talk about Dsge models. That's kind of the, quote, state-of-the-art macro model that people really work with in central banks. That Dsge, I'll write it here. So Dsge stands for Dynamic Stochastic General Equilibrium Model. And we will get the models that look like this later in the course when we talk about the business cycle. For the moment, what we're looking at is a dynamic general equilibrium model. So why isn't this a DSGE? It's not going to be stochastic. So basically, households will be able to make a decision about the entire future path of their consumption and savings starting at time zero. So the household makes a decision at time zero, and that decision will describe the future of the economy forever. Stochastic, as you may know, means random. So there will be no random shocks. Everything will be predictable in this economy. So I'm next going to talk about the setup of the model, but I think I'm going to do that in the next video.